Hello, everybody. This is Mike OBrian with the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and we have a real treat for you today. Three powerhouses in the fire service on one call, and I'm so excited to have a couple minutes to sit and chat, to hear about the fire service, not only from the U.S. Fire Administration, the National Fire Academy, but from the International Association of Fire Chiefs. And I can't think of three better representatives of our fire service than who we have with you today. We have Donna Black, who is going to be the incoming IAFC president in August at FRI, a fire chief in the South. We have Tonya Hoover, who is the deputy U.S. Fire Administrator. Many of you know her from her roots in California and is now on the East Coast and helping lead our nation's fire service. And as well as Dr. Moore-Merrell, who is the new U.S. Fire Administrator and has such a wealth of information in the fire service. So we're going to just kick it off. Dr. Moore, I'm going to go to you. Some of us know you, but some of the fire service doesn't. And you have this very commanding presence when you walk in a room. You can command a room just by walking in, but that didn't come just 'cause. And so tell us who you are and tell us what you're doing for the fire service.
Hello, Michael. Thank you for having us. This is an exciting opportunity, I think, and it comes at a great time when we are really focusing on women in leadership, right? So I'm really excited to be here with these two women. So background, and I appreciate the very kind remarks that you just made. I have been in the fire service a little over, 33 years now. And it's been quite a ride along the way. I went on the job in 1987 in Memphis, Tennessee, Memphis Fire Department. I was a paramedic there, spent 7 years there before being recruited to the IAFF to lead basically fire-based EMS and build up fire-based EMS resources. And that was at a time when we were just seeing, the private ambulance cadre really start to take a place, and they were going on the stock exchange. They were really growing as their own industry, and there were a lot of concerns about privatization of EMS and taking those jobs away from the fire services. So that was my role, is to build up fire-based EMS, and I did a lot of work from the IFF, certainly with the IFC at that time, and my colleagues like Gary Ludwig and John Sinclair and all of those names that you all recognize. And so we have sort of grown up together in our careers and really focused in that arena. And then later, at the IFF, as leadership changed, then I went into a different role where I was leading the research component and really focused on operations. Crew size was a big deal, and what I focused on mostly in my own research, and looking at, 4-person staffing as a minimum, for example, conducting research. And I was fortunate enough to get a lot of FEMA grants, AFG grants through my career. So I've actually had over 23 million in grants, right, to do research in the field and look at everything from crew size to data needs and what we're doing in the fire service. And was fortunate to turn that research into practice, into NFPA standards, for example, and NFPA 1710, and had the opportunity to work on, in the active shooter arena with NFPA 3000. So I've had a lot of great opportunities. Certainly in my 26 years at the IFF is where the bulk of that happened. And moving from there into starting up a data center based on the research we had, and looking at making sure local governments, local fire departments could use their own data, which was a huge gap, right? And even remains a gap right now as we are talking. So I'm sure we're going to talk more about that. And then in October of last year, President Biden tapped me to come and lead in this capacity. So I'm really honored to be able to sit as the U.S. Fire Administrator. So I'm excited about the opportunity and what we're going to be able to do together.
Yep. So for those who don't know, what does the U.S. Fire Administrator do?
Well, there's a lot. So, and I see Chief Hoover laughing, right? Because we actually, as the leader, we are to lead the U.S. Fire Service. And I think one of the things that I have realized over my time in the fire service, and as I come into this position at USFA, that USFA has not in the past several years had its real place or where it should be in the fire service as the leader, right? And I really think that over time, the national organizations have started taking on roles that USFA should have had. And a lot of that has happened over time. So my job right now is to restore relevance, make us mission driven, make sure that we are focused on, leading the fire service and creating opportunity for our local, state, tribal, territorial partners, whether that is in education, whether that is in awareness, certainly in data. We're going to be talking a lot about that. And those are really what encompasses the mission, right? We are here as USFA to strengthen and support our fire service and EMS services and their capability to respond to all hazards. So that is our role, and that's what I'm going to be focused on, is leading the USFA and our crew to do just that.
Yeah, definitely a lot of work there up at the big top. Now, Chief Black, you're the fire chief in Duck. It's a great place for those of us in the Midwest to go vacation. So tell us about your recent career here as fire chief and your role within the IFC.
And I'll start by, and we're going to go by Lori, Tonya, and Donna today, so we can keep it easy. But I've had a quick conversation with Lori at one of the conferences, but thank you for what you're trying to do, because again, I represent small volunteer combination departments, and they, we'll get into it a little bit here in a minute, but what you're doing to put us in the forefront at that level is really helpful down at our level. And we've had that discussion. I will talk awareness too here in a moment. So I came into the fire service, I have 25 years in, moving to a small town, having a business, having another job before that, to help my community. And I went to my first training and saw fire, and it was over for me. I knew what I wanted to do, and then I fast tracked to get everything. And in my time here, I am different to the modern day firefighter when we start talking recruitment retention. I've been here for 25 years. I worked elsewhere for a short period of time, career, but I came up through the ranks here in a deputy chief role. And then I've been the career chief, and I was the only career position. Now it'll be 16 years in April. So in that time, I've had to deal with the struggles that a lot of other departments are having right now. And when do you transition? When do you add career staffing? How do you do that? How do you convince council? So now we sit with, thank you, engine crews of 4 every day, and still a combination department with a volunteer response in a very challenging area. It's beautiful to visit, not so easy to live. So that's been my struggle with staffing, and we'll get into that. My role with IFC, I reached out as soon as I became chief. I reached out to 2 things, BCOS and EFO. And those 2 things really helped shape me and my experience to lead here in Duck, because I needed outside validation, outside criticism, outside advice. And I pulled that all together. My role through IFC came naturally in questioning, right? I'm the first one to question in the boardroom, hey, how do we do this? Should we do this? Can we look at it differently? And I think I've kind of had a natural, anyone that knows who works with me, I probably will poke the bear a little bit to try to get answers because of my perspective from how I've come up through the fire service. So in a nutshell, that's it. I'm excited to serve in the role I'm going in. I'm excited to be on this call with these 2 women to see for IFC what will be the next 150 years. So we'll be focusing a lot on what does our next 150 look like, and I'm sure we'll get into that today.
So Tonya, obviously California Fire Service, I think you went to this certain school that you're very proud of, and then you go out west, and now you're back east. So tell us about who you are. And I know you as like a change agent, right? I've always looked at you as somebody who can move mountains with just tremendous effort by a bunch of other people. You get people to the table and make change happen. It's an awesome thing. I've seen you do it more than once. So tell us who you are and what you're doing right now.
Oh, wow, Mike. Thanks so much. That's a big introduction to Phil. So I too am honored to be here, because it really is the bookends of my career. I actually started out on the East Coast. I started in the fire service when I was 14 years old. in a little town called Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, as a volunteer junior member. And there was a television show on TV when I was growing up, and we all know it. So the minute somebody does this and we talk about medics, everybody knows we're talking about emergency. I more than anything, yeah, right. I more than anything wanted to be a firefighter paramedic. I thought that was it, and I wanted to go to California and do that, and there I was on the East Coast. And so when I had a chance, my family was actively involved in the fire service. Funny enough that my father was, at the time, they called them civil defense directors. They're now called EMs. He was the civil defense director for the county we lived in, which meant close ties to the fire service. He was a volunteer fire chief. So my whole life was really around this public service, the fire department, the volunteer fire service in Pennsylvania. So I go off to that school, Oklahoma State University. After high school, had a chance to get my undergraduate degree there, and then had a short stint time in North Carolina, where at the time my fiance was working, and to be honest, I struggled to find a job in my profession. But we had an opportunity then to move to California, where things just took off. So there I was, this East Coast girl going to California, and I remember telling my to-be spouse at the time, 5 years on the West Coast, and we're going back east. 5 years, that's it. Well, 30 years later, I'm back on the East Coast. So much for that. But my time in California was just incredible, because I had a chance to start in small departments, make my way through. I worked for a major university. In fact, all of my career has been in the community risk reduction, fire prevention, training arena. I worked for multitudes of departments. Some people think I couldn't keep a job, but each one of those were an opportunity to really expand my knowledge. So it was a small department. I worked for a county, worked for fire districts, I worked for university, and then I had my opportunity to be a fire marshal. And then soon, within a few years, I got tapped as the assistant state fire marshal to ask if I would be interested in that job. And, of course, somebody says you want to leave local government and go work for the state, you wonder if you have fallen and hit your head. But it was an incredible opportunity at a time to work with a great group of folks, to work with another visionary. I have an opportunity now to work for a visionary, but I really cut my teeth on my first visionary of Chief Dargan. And to go from a local government into a very large state government, the 5th largest economy in the world, was an incredible opportunity to, really to play, I call big league ball. The chance just happened that I also then had the opportunity to become the state fire marshal, and held that role until 2015 when I retired. Well, 2016, and retired from service to come back east here to the federal government. I firmly believe the opportunity that I have to come back to USFA would not have happened had it not been for the experiences I had in California and the incredible work we did there. So I came back to the East Coast, came back as the superintendent of the National Fire Academy, where I knew the National Fire Academy from times that I came to classes here. California has a I think it still does, has a robust fire service system, a robust education system with a large group of individuals working hard in that space. So I did not spend a whole lot of time at the National Fire Academy, but when I came back here and reconnected, I knew I wanted to up the ante for the NFA as much as possible and really spread the word. You get folks to think about USFA, NFA, not just as a place to, what's the word that gets used all the time? You'll build network, and that gets thrown around a lot when you talk about the NFA. It's a great network. It's so much more than that. It's about a community of practice in a very special place where you can have difficult discussions. And I wanted folks to understand that that's what the USFA NFA was about, not just the networking, but all of the other things that takes place when you're really embedded in a location for 5 or 10 days. Fast forward, I had the opportunity to then, I call it test, but opportunity to interview for the deputy fire administrator, which here's this small town girl from small town in Pennsylvania coming back to the mid-Atlantic and having a chance to serve at the USFA as the deputy fire administrator. And so it's been a whirlwind trip, and what an experience. And just, I think from the start to the, I don't want to call it the finish, but from the front end to this, where I'm at now, I mean, just the broad look at the fire service that I've had the pleasure and honor to engage in, I think is it just really speaks to passion and my commitment to community and the fire service.
I appreciate all three of you giving your background, because really, I hope we inspire future leaders, right? And you all have very similar paths, and look at where it's taken us to some pretty cool heights. And I'm hoping that inspires this next generation, because we need help in the fire service, right? We need more firefighters. We need more female firefighters, you know. And I think you three all represent, you're somebody to strive to be. And so, Dr. Moore, I'm sorry, Lori, I'm going to get yelled at by the incoming. So I don't know when we changed NFIRS, and we can't have
call her, hey, Mike, we call her Dr. Lori because it's just,
it's just
everybody knows her that way.
All right, Dr. Lori. So right, I think we know how important our firefighters are in putting good data into their NFIRS report, right? We know the importance, but there's this frustration and this hammer. I'm sure you don't have the data you need at your fingertips like maybe you've had in the past. What do you see? What do you see with data, and why is it so important for our local fire chiefs? But what are we going to do with this thing?
Well, you know which button to push, right? Right out of the box. So yeah, we have a data problem. That is no surprise to anyone. That's one of the things that I've been personally invested in for the last 12, 15 years is data in the fire service. Because if we can't answer questions locally, how do you make decisions? How do fire chiefs defend the assets they have to match resources to the risk environment and they respond, if we don't have information to talk about that match, right? How do we ask or justify, additional assets, PPE, anything without sufficient information to do so? And so we do have in this country, which was when it started back in the late 70s, was a fantastic idea. Let's create a national data system. Let's have it be compulsory for fire departments to contribute. It remains voluntary today. As much pressure as we can leverage, that is being leveraged by the federal government, including our grants application process, where you must be entering data into the system. The problem today, however, and has been for some time, is that we are working on a legacy system that hasn't been touched in 22 years. Now, I want you to think for just a moment about technology changes, data exchange capabilities, and how that has changed in the last year, let alone the last 22 years, right? And so that's part of our issue right now. And so one of the things that we are focused on squarely is modernizing a system. We won't be fixing anything. We're going to be standing up a new data system. It will be a cloud-based system that will have a series of APIs or data exchange pathways, and give us capability for data capture, not just data collection, right? Which means we have to reduce the burden for firefighter data entry. So Mike, you mentioned that, firefighters have been inputting data. Well, one of the things, and this is without exception, everywhere that I have spoken about data in the last, I'm going to say a dozen years, every time I talk about firefighter data entry and I say, now, how many of you have, your records management system or whatever data system you have, we can name all the vendors. How many of you are guilty of making sure you hit the right button so another page doesn't open up and you have to enter more data. So you find your streamlined way, or how many you have a sticky note with which buttons to hit. So you make sure you don't open up that extra module. And just like you two are doing, right? Everybody laughs because you know you're guilty. And so we have a situation that I think is, we're not going to fix that with punitive, we're not going to fix that with measures. We're not going to fix it with training. That's not going to happen, because we're not training from the baseline, the importance of data. We're not getting investment in the understanding, and we've got an overwhelming data, list of things variables that have to be entered, and those things are coming together to be unwieldy. So what we're going to be focused on is creating a new data standard, which means we're going to minimize the data set itself, the number of variables that have to be collected. We're going to look at high-level categories of the must-have information, not all of this superfluous, thousands of items that can be collected. We are simply not going to have it. We need to focus on what we must have for decision-making, for fire safety lessons learned. Those are the kinds of things that I want us to focus on. So we're going to build a new data standard. And then we're going to build this new system. So it's twofold, right? We have to have a new data set. We have to build a new data system. And then we have to transition departments. The new data standard and the new data system we can do in a very short time frame as soon as we identify funding. So Chief Hoover and I are really working on that. The piece that's going to take us a little time is the transition of departments onto a system, right? And so we really want to talk about, ease of entry. We want to talk about reducing the burden. We want to talk about accuracy, quality information, and 100% reporting. So we need to have the nation's fire service contribute so that we have this kind of information. So we're going to try to streamline the way they can do that. And then we will be urging, as you guys know, we can forcefully to have every fire department contribute once we make it much easier for them to do so and reduce those barriers. So a lot of exciting things ahead, but that was a day one, hit the ground when I got here mission. And I can tell you that it is being supported by the FEMA administrator, and she is opening as many doors as possible for us in that regard. And we are very grateful and looking forward to the opportunities ahead with that.
Okay, so let's stay on the data trend. Tonya, I'm going to go to you. So you've been involved in code development, and probably some of the stuff we're capturing is we thought was important because we needed to prove some point somewhere to change something to keep people safe. So where do you see data playing in the built environment and code standards? How, if we can transform this a little bit, how do you see it maybe aiding in that arena?
Well, that's a good question, Mike, because data does drive the decisions that we make. And I think it's time that we admit that and accept it and move forward, because the longer we push back, there are going to be other people that bypass us in our efforts. So, the data collection pieces, as Dr. Lori mentioned, is so critical, and that starts down at the local level. And I'll use an example. Bless my daughter's heart, she went to law enforcement. Yeah, she fell, she hit her head, whatever. No, and I'm so honored that she did that. I really am. But one of the things that she talked about early is they spent a lot of time in the academy about doing their reports. And you talk about data collection in there. I mean, they are very specific on how they write their reports, where things go in their reports, who says what to who. I mean, and a lot of it is not just clicking buttons and filling fields. They're actually having to do the narrative. And that report then goes to a sergeant or a lieutenant, I can't remember their ranking category, for its review. Once it goes past that person, it goes to the next person review. If that narrative isn't correct and doesn't match up the points on that dispatch, it goes back to the officer. The officer has to clean it up before it goes back and gets submitted. So she spends a lot of time doing reports at the end of her shift, right? Sometimes she's not getting out until an hour past her shift time because she's got to finish the reports, or it's the first thing in the morning. So I asked her, as a rookie police officer, I said, so tell me about reports. And she says, thank goodness I have an English degree, Mom, because my reports go through fairly quickly. Writing is important. And then I asked her, well, why do you think it's important to do them? Okay, it's a test. And she says, well, I mean, how do people know what I'm doing? How does my boss know what I'm doing? How does my chief know what I'm doing? And I know my chief is trying to get us more officers, and what we've been told in the academy and what we do is provide that information to be able to accomplish, what management wants. And she says, and here's the other thing, Mom, someday I'm going to have to go to court and I'm going to have to testify based on my report. And I went, ding, 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 ding. So I look at that data gathering as we've got to justify what we're doing and why we're doing it. It's no longer the feel good because we're the fire service. We are competing with everyone, whether it's in codes and standards, which we knew we are competing with builders, we're competing with other industries that are collecting data to be able to move a proposition or a proposal forward. We've got to have accurate information. With that said, though, on the current, on our legacy NFIRS system, having spent, now I can say 5 years in USFA and opportunity to work across the different programs, is that program was never adequately resourced as far as people and money. It was never adequately seen as an opportunity for the fire service and what it meant to the fire service, not to the Consumer Product Safety Councils, not to, some of these other folks, but what it meant to the fire service. And so now we're having to play catch up. The other thing is we don't control how that data comes in. It is voluntary. It relies on local government to understand the importance of their data, and it relies on states to upload that in a timely manner. If states are not uploading in a timely manner, we've got gaps in data. So the data that I'm seeing for code development, I can pull my stuff from my state and I can compare it to some national data, but the dates don't match up depending on when other states uploaded, right? Mm-hmm. So we've got to get to the place where we can jump the data ahead. See, I've been paying attention to what the boss says.
I'm so proud right now. I'm so excited right now.
I'm getting a promotion. We've got to find ways to jumpstart that data so that states have the ability to do what they do with their data, but ensuring that local government can grab their data too. We can't have this delay in upload into a system because we're waiting. And I get it. I oversaw a state data system. I know how many people I had working in my care, what we called in California at the time, CARES. When you've got a state which is the 5th largest economy in the world and you only have 2 people in your data center, I mean, we had to upload it when we got it in, and then you even had local government, and it was a requirement in the state to report into the state system, a health and safety code requirement, and I still had large departments, including the metros, not reporting on a regular basis into the data system for all sorts of reasons. So this is twofold. Yes, we need that data to do what we're doing in the codes and standards world because we need to compete against the folks that have propositions that they're trying to put in that built environment. And we also have to keep driving the message home to folks that data is important and you can't just sit by because it's a pain in the butt and not do it. This is what's going to justify our existence. Okay, I'm off my soapbox.
Well, Tonya, I think it transitions to something I'm going to throw over to Chief Donna. So, if I say to Donna, hey, what's a pressing issue within the IFC and for our membership? I bet recruitment retention, and it's not just a volunteer problem anymore. It's a metro problem, and we can add staffing in this as well, right? Donna talked about transitioning departments. So, Donna, when you hear this, part of me gets excited, finally, this is going to help us capture, because we have a gazillion spreadsheets and forms that we're doing ancillary to collect what we need. So as fire chief, I can go advocate. So when you hear this talk at a national level, really what's coming, do you think this is going to have some benefits for us in recruitment, retention, and staffing?
So it's funny because I love data as well, and I'm a data dork. around what I've had to do here, right? But how I'm going to bring it down to the average firefighter that has to type it in the other room, right? How do we get them to understand the importance? We at our level understand the importance because we're going up against councils and boards and governments to justify money, justify existence. But I've tried to simplify it, and I've done a couple talks on this. I've written about this. We have to make it understandable at the lowest possible level to see what they're getting out of it. I'll give an example. Right now, recruitment retention. We can talk more about it, but there's an area down here, and I listen to it. A couple of them are members of my department career and work in other areas that are volunteer. They see the writing on the wall that they need help, and so we have this conversation all the time. Well, I can pull your data on how many calls you run a month, and your argument isn't there. That's not enough data. You got to show the whole picture. So they're starting to get it. I've used data from day one and thank you, EFO, for all my presentations with council, even if it's just trending. I've tried to simplify it, right? So at this level, the data is very important. It's very specific. And if you go into NFIRS, everyone freaks out with what that looks like. But the data doesn't have to be complicated at the lower levels, right? Show the trending data of just, we had this many volunteers in 2002, we have this many now. Look where the transition was, and it had to do with all kinds of things. I have my graphs for 15 years. But I think part of it is making everyone understand at the simplest level, not even the NFIRS level, of how important capturing your day is. My folks don't realize how much data they capture every day. I make them log just about everything, right? There is a log, and I can pull that data. I know how much PT they've done. I know how much Con Ed they've done. I make them capture their entire day. They're doing data, they just don't realize it, right? And then I can pull that out and take it to council. So I think then we talk about staffing and recruitment retention, even in the smallest department that doesn't have the time to think about the math, needs to learn how to use what's happening in its simplest form. Thank you for simplifying it, because I think that will change it. I think there's a disconnect between filling out NFIRS and what they need at the local level. And I think we're on the road to solve that.
Yeah, I love what you just said, because it makes it personal, right? It makes it personal to, when I say personal, to the department and to the individual firefighters and medics, right?
Sure.
Because part of that, and I love what you said about logging their day, that is absolutely relevant. Because if we twist this just a little bit, part of the data we need to collect is the health and safety implication, right? On them.
Yes.
What have they been exposed to today? Right? What did they do for health and safety, the fitness wellness initiatives, right? So all of these pieces of information are relevant to them. It's relevant to the department. It's relevant to recruitment, as you said. And Mike, you hit it. We are having a massive recruitment problem right now. And I've talked with chiefs after chiefs, and I've actually started compiling, just as we listen, compiling some of the things that we're hearing and the innovation that we're seeing in some of the recruitment opportunities, but it's all based on information they've collected themselves, not in our national data system, but something they've had to be creative about, just like you just said, Chief, creative about collecting what you need. And that's the kind of insight we have to have going forward, because that's the insight we need to build in this new data system.
And isn't recruitment, I'm going to throw this out there, is, the recruitment is about the community, and that need to have your insight, your data, Chief Donna, to have what's going on in your community and understand what your needs are. It's nice to have the national level, but really to talk to your community, you need your information.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, the recruitment piece, and you used the word earlier, Dr. Lori, is awareness, right? And anyone that knows me, I'm on the awareness kick. We have got to have a way to make the entire universe understand what public safety does, right? You can name the discipline. I think there's, until you need someone's help, until you need police, fire, EMS, you just accept that it's there. And a lot of people really don't understand what's behind that. And so you watch all these little departments. I saw a great video the other day out of a volunteer department in New York State. It's an awesome recruitment video. It touches everything. DEI, the average person that, leaves work and is going to the fire. And it's like this poor one little department in one little state, in one little town, is doing that work. And I hope through IFC, I hope more conversations at this level that we can make it more of a national awareness campaign and not put it just on all the departments, because volunteer career, the recruitment issue is there. And I just don't think people are aware of the opportunity and aware of what's really needed.
Agreed. Absolutely agree with you.
So we get asked this question, state, local, federal. How many firefighters are in the state of Michigan? I'm sure you get asked this question, how many firefighters are in the US? And we probably go, and then it gets compounded when we say, right, whether we put them into some form of a class. But since I have you three, how many female firefighters or fire chiefs are in the United States? Do we know?
We have a rough estimate of a percentage, but do we have an exact count? That's like saying how many, I can ask how many attorneys, and then it's like, well, how many attorneys have passed the bar? We've got a general idea.
Okay.
So then you take it from the IFC perspective, and Chief Sinclair did the initiative in 2017 to create the Women Chiefs Council. You have Women in Fire as well. And so he came to myself and Chief Kalkbrenner from Phoenix to try to get a Chiefs group together, and we called it Women Chiefs Council. So we identified what we thought, right, based on, but you have to be a member of IFC for us to really know. And then, you try to recruit others, but a couple others have taken that over now, but we've opened it up to chief officers, and we're getting a lot more folks on Zoom calls and things like that. There's a lot more people out there than I think we're capturing or realize, and it's definitely a gap in our data collection for sure.
So I
One of the things, Mike, sorry, before you change on that, I just want to say this, because I think Donna just hit on something about there's a lot more than we know. And one of the things that I had the opportunity to do in the last couple of weeks is just, it was an idea that one fire chief, a male, by the way, took on, and he invited and had, a Women on Fire is what they called it. And it was by invitation. He reached out, and it was mainly to metro departments, and said, this is open. There are 50 seats, send women, right? And everybody was told nobody got more than 2 seats from any department. And he had a waiting list. And these were, I call some of them girls, because this was, most of them were younger. They had not encountered a lot of what we have been through in our career, because they are coming in at a time where they are feeling much more accepted. They're feeling much more, have opportunities laid out before them. And I think that is unique. So bringing these, and I shouldn't call them girls, but they are to me. So bringing them together and having them learn from those of us who've been around for a while, I think was a brilliant idea. And I hope other chiefs, there's been a challenge that has been levied by Chief Dan Peterson. That's who it was, out of Salt Lake. And he's, and who's the next chief who's going to do this? Because it was the most effective 2 days I have spent in a long time with these 50, just having these conversations, having these women ask questions, and helping them learn about their own leadership mindset. Because it's not just about getting women on the job, it's about them being successful on the job. And what we're seeing a lot is when women come on the job, as soon as they have a child, they end up leaving, because they cannot find that match of how to be a mom, and take on their home life, raise a child, and do this job. And that's not right. We need policies that address that, and we need to have these conversations, and we need to provide insights for these women. I was an only, had a child and a single mom for a long time too. It's not easy. And if it hadn't been for colleagues who were willing to, I was on 24-hour shifts, and if it hadn't been for colleagues who were willing to watch my child while I was on shift, other firefighters and their wives, I wouldn't have stayed on the job either. So these are conversations that are not yet resolved, and we need to continue these opportunities. So I just wanted you to know about that opportunity, because I think it's mentioning.
I love it. So I know I learned about Girls on Fire Camp, right?
Yes.
So we've run 4 now. We actually had our 3 have gone from our camps into our academy, right? So it's that long-term vision. But I love what you're talking about is how do we put like-minded people in the room to make this overall successful. I'm so excited because we had our first time, 2 of my stations were all female on a shift, which has not happened here, but it's been a lot of work by a lot of people to get more females. So Tonya, let me throw this to you. How do we take what you hear from Dr. Moore? We know there's some initiatives. So what is the average fire chief? What would be your recommendation to an average fire chief to make sure women are successful? Not just getting them in the door, but what do we do to help them succeed in their career?
That's a good question, Mike. And I'm gonna start with that fire chief. If you come into the job with a certain mindset, and I do not want to, I don't want to single out males, but if you came into service with a certain experience, it's very difficult for you to understand the other person's experience. That bias, unconscious bias that you bring, you say to yourself, no, I treat everybody the same, but you're treating people the same based on what you know, right? How you view the world. And I think when you're bringing in, the diversity such as male, female, there are very different dynamics that go on. There's tons of research. I'm going to refer to Dr. Lori for this, but there's tons of research about how women view family life compared to how a male views family life, especially if it's a 2-parent organization, right? A 2-parent family. Where does the grandparent sit in that? Go back to something that Dr. Lori said. Had I not had a mother that, and we were 2 parents in the same household, both of us working all the time. Had I not had my mom as my daycare provider, I wouldn't have done any of this, because she gave me the opportunity to step away from the home and go do what I needed to do for work. But I think for every leader, there needs to be an understanding that you got to step away from what you think is real. You got to step away from what you believe and look at the situations that people are dealing with today that maybe you didn't deal with. I speak to that because I look at even today when we have this come back to in-person work. For 2 years, we've had people, I'm going to say, disengaged. This here is a 2-dimensional engagement. Email is 1-dimensional engagement. We have been disengaged in the community of practice. We've been able to do some things, but we have a whole bunch of folks coming back, and there's a whole lot of angst to that because we've lost a certain skill set, or what do I do with my family now? Because I've been 2 years at home. I mean, there's some separation anxiety there. There's some, I know what I did 2 years ago before I had to come back to the office, but I'm having separation anxiety. And I think we have to recognize that men and women look at that differently, especially based on how they grew up and what their current family dynamics are. And I think for any leader, chief, assistant chief, captain, lieutenant, whomever's in charge of the shift has to step back for a moment and take a breath that, what we did 20 years ago may or may not apply today. How we treated something 10 years ago may or may not apply today. And it makes it even more complicated because we're talking about people and we're talking about behavior change. So, is there a quick fix to this? I don't believe there's a quick fix, but I think we have to talk about this. It's got to be open and honest. And we've got to be able to feel comfortable putting on the table if we're going to make progress.
If I can respond to Tonya there, you're spot on, right? The perception expectation piece. And I think it starts bigger than a male female coming into the fire service. We've got to have the hard conversation amongst ourselves within the department. Like what is our service delivery? Not everyone's the same in what they provide for the community. And we have to be okay. I just wrote about this because we're a prideful bunch, right? Like we don't want to fail. None of us want to fail because we're here to serve our friends, neighbors, and family. But at some point, we have to start internally and look, what can we provide? What's out there to draw from? Because I can tell you, I can try to have a diverse workforce. If you know where I live, I'm doing the best I can, but I'm drawing from one locally, a small area, and then to get people to move down here and afford to move down here, I have challenges just in getting people to want to apply in a small area. Um, we have a great, healthy working environment here, but we have other challenges to try to get people here. But one thing I can speak for our department is we are clear on our mission and what our expected and realistic service delivery is. And part of it is the larger piece, and we've touched on it. Look at the influence of EMS. So many of our calls, I can tell you, I've been able to get staffing to help support our EMS system. We have county EMS, and we have to have those hard conversations, make sure we're looking at what's specific. We're all the same. We all have the recruitment retention issues, but how we're looking internally to solve those, we may have to tweak a little bit. There might not be the one bullet.
All right, we're going to shotgun the end here because we've hit the end of our time. And I think with the three of you, I could talk for hours. So 60 seconds. What's next for you at the USFA?
What's next for me at the USFA? Boy, every day is an adventure. And so, listening to the boss, we're talking about the look at the organization top, up and down. We're talking about the ability to fill positions that have been vacant for a long time. We're talking about full engagement in the education and training arena. And we're talking about that relevance and currency and how to connect with our SLTT, state, local, tribal, and territorial partners to make sure that we're giving them the very best and they know who the USFA is and what they can provide for them.
Chief Black, what's the next you're bringing? Obviously, right, you're the vice president. For people, that's the deputy chief of the IFC. You're due to become the president. What's your 60 seconds?
Thanks for letting me follow Tonya with her 1-minute elevator speech there. IFC, educate, serve, lead. How does that look in post-COVID world and in the next 150? I hope to come in there with a perspective of from the boots on the ground up and how we use IFC with NFA, with the U.S. Fire Administrator to that awareness piece for me is huge, because if we can help tell the story of everyone doing the work, we're going to ease the burden on the smaller chiefs, the smaller departments that are trying to do that work. I really think we can take a larger role in the awareness piece, and then also find the tools to educate and give our folks the things they need to be able to be successful. Talk to their councils. I think we need a better, I hope IFC, I'd love to see us do more with ICMA, because again, that's where we need to, that's where the decisions are made for all the chiefs, right? We've got to be talking to our government. So I think there's opportunity. I'm super excited to work with these two women going forward, and excited to bring, again, IFC into the next 150.
Fantastic. All right, Dr. Moore, we're waiting. What's next?
I get the last word here. I'm so excited. I could just say what they said, but I will try to sum it up as a fire service as a whole, right? I think going forward, I want the fire service to be data informed, if not data driven, right? It's almost a stair step. We've got to be data informed so we know how to move next. We've got to make sure we're focused on our community risk and matching resources to risk, because that affects everything. It's fire fatalities, fire injuries, property loss, all of those things that we really have to make an impact. I want to focus on this recruit situation. I do think that we are going to have to find more innovative ways, and there are chiefs who are doing it. So we've got to learn from each other. And I love how Donna said that. It's education and it's spreading that. Working together, the networking is important. So what are the lessons learned there, and how can we improve that? Because if we don't, we're going to have real gaps in our safety net and our capability to respond. We've got to focus continually on elevating that and helping people we are recruiting understand the reality of this job. It is not always just fire suppression. We are, 75%, if not more in some communities, EMS driven. And so we've got to elevate that conversation back to where it should be. We have to continue to focus on our climate change impact, whether it is response to storms, whether it's response to wildland, and particularly where we all reside is right where that wildland meets the interface or the built environment. So we have got to continue to address building codes and get the science out there. If builders are not going to put residential sprinklers, then they better have some space between these structures, right? We have to focus on a science-driven impact on our built environment, and so we've got to focus on that. The last thing I will say is on DEI and the diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to be addressing that at the academy. So Eric Skablix, our superintendent, is really focused on making sure we have curriculum that is teaching those soft skills, is understanding what equity means, and it's not equality, right? And we need to know the difference. And I think that we all, as a fire service, continue to focus in that the fact that diversity doesn't just mean ethnicity, race, and gender. It is far beyond that. And our newer generations that we're bringing on get that. It's about attitude. It's about behavior. Diversity is about, intellect. It's about much more than what we see as the obvious. And finally, I said finally already, but I'm going to have one more finally. Finally, I want to see the fire service with one voice. So I'm going to be working with the leaders of our national organizations and to say that we have to coalesce. We've got to have a single voice, whether that is in our advocacy approach or whether that is in our fire safety messaging, right? We've got a real indifference, a real complacency to fire safety in this country, which is why we've had over 550 fire fatalities since January 1. This is a problem. And that by any other measure is a disaster, right? We are having fires, they are not going down. Fire fatalities are up. And we must, as the fire service, address this with one voice. So that is the mission that I have before me.
Wow, what an awesome way to end. A couple high topics for anybody who's made it at this point. Number one, fire chiefs, support your staff. If you're not a graduate of EFO, get your staff to the National Fire Academy. It's more than EFO. There are classes, programs, pilot programs that are going to help them from community risk reduction to operations to managing a 29 alarm incident. Get them engaged in the Fire Academy at a very low cost. If you have a story to tell, get engaged and start teaching. The USFA, visit their webpage filled with resources that are going to arm you locally in community risk reduction to stopping cooking fires. The data that Dr. Moore just spoke about when we look at the residential losses is all at your fingertips. If you're not a member of the IAFC, join the IAFC. Go to IAFC.org today. FRI, Fire Rescue International, is set for August 24th. You'll probably see these three rock stars there at that time frame, but head down to San Antonio, make it a plan. There are all sorts of conferences that are upcoming. WUI, Wildland Urban Interface in Reno. Community risk reduction is scheduled in May for up in Toronto, so it's truly international. But get engaged because we need fire chiefs to keep pushing the level. And thank you to the three of you for your continued leadership, your friendship. The fire service is going places with the three of you, and I'm so proud that you took some time with us today. So with that, have a great day, everybody.